So today we have probably a more hotly contested race between top two Democratic contenders. Of course, today we are going to be doing a 2020 Democratic primary prediction, pretty much just state maps, not margins, because it would be a lot more intensive going into margins. So we're just going to do it off of a state and just front-face level. Of course, I'm putting Bernie Sanders on the more Democratic, more left side. Joe Biden, of course, being on the Republican side, not because he is a Republican, but he definitely holds more centrist and a little bit more conservative views than Bernie Sanders would. So when looking at this map, it's pretty much all about how 2016 turned out and 2008 turned out. Hillary Clinton versus Barack Obama, and then Hillary Clinton again versus Bernie Sanders. And we're going to see how Bernie Sanders did because, of course, Joe Biden was not on the map. Joe Biden was originally polling ahead of Bernie Sanders, but as soon as he was out of the league, Bernie Sanders' numbers ticked up. They may or may not have been correlated. That's a discussion for another video, but Biden probably would have outperformed Bernie Sanders if he did decide to run against Hillary Clinton just based off the two options going against each other. But when Biden was knocked out, that prompted a new wave for people to come out and vote against Hillary Clinton, but for a specific candidate. Prime example would be West Virginia, where exit polling data show that they wanted a more conservative president, yet voted for Bernie Sanders, which doesn't make any sense. It was mainly because in spite against Hillary Clinton, but also he did resonate with a number of those West Virginia voters better. So, again, it's tricky on how I'm going to talk about this, but it's, again, a discussion for another video. In this video, we're going to be particularly doing, I believe it is set on safe and toss-up only and independent. We're not going to be doing any toss-up states. We're just going to go through the map. We're not going to do it in any particular order, so we're going to start off on the West Coast. When we start off on the West Coast, there are pretty much Sanders strongholds in states that have heavy progressive populations, including Washington, Oregon, and Hawaii. These states clearly would go for Bernie Sanders yet again against someone like Joseph Biden. And also disregard the electoral vote map margins. They should give you a mild, accurate indication of how the population is dispersed and the number of delegates. But again, states with the same number of electoral votes don't necessarily mean they have the same number of delegates. It just really matters on the Democratic Party's presence in each particular state and a number of other factors that I'm not going to get into. But just use that as a mild indication of who would win nationwide and whether or not it would go into a contested convention, because a Democratic nominee does need to win a considerable portion of the delegates, not just an overall majority or plurality. So looking at where we're starting off, in the state of California, I see Joe Biden carrying that one. Bernie Sanders did not do well here back in 2016 after the entire name recognition argument has been thrown out because he was known for such a long time. Hillary Clinton was the presumptive Democratic nominee. Everything was working against her, and she still won California by a considerable margin compared to where she should have if she was the presumptive nominee, just based off how people wouldn't come out and vote. Hillary Clinton did pretty well here. Joe Biden would also do pretty well here. The same number of voters who loved Barack Obama, loved Hillary Clinton, are going to come out and vote for Joe Biden. They're not going to go over to the Bernie Sanders side. We could see it in some other states. We're not going to see it in California. We're not going to see it in Nevada either with the heavy Latino population. That one is likely going to hold on to the more moderate type Democrat with Joe Biden. But going over to Utah, Bernie Sanders is probably going to hold on to that one. He'll hold on to Idaho, Wyoming, pretty much a number of these Midwestern or Great Plains type states. These ones are going to go for Bernie Sanders. We really don't see a type of Biden influence, sphere of influence out here because the Democratic Party, number one, doesn't have as strong as an reach out here, meaning mainstream candidates don't typically win because most of the elections here are won through grassroots campaigns. Also, the fact that Bernie Sanders definitely resonates with rural voters a lot better than other Democrats do, even better than Hillary Clinton. Although he didn't win in some rural areas, he probably would have if he had more name recognition. But going over to states like North Dakota, going to Bernie Sanders. Okay, Montana goes to Bernie Sanders. South Dakota, that one I actually see going to Joe Biden. That's the only state that I actually see going out of this little area here. But Nebraska goes to Sanders for, it's just the margins in 2016, and then you take in a number of other factors. Bernie Sanders typically does a lot better here, and especially with more name recognition, he's also going to do it a bit better here. Kansas easily goes to him. Oklahoma goes to him. Colorado I'll come back to because that one I'm a little conflicted about. Alaska goes to him just based off how they voted back in 2016. But Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, the main parts of the Sun Belt I really see going for Joe Biden. With the heavy Latino population, again, Joe Biden is definitely going to resonate with them a lot better than Bernie Sanders. Again, being a part of the Obama administration is definitely going to boost his numbers amongst African-American voters, which is something that we're going to talk about when we get to the South. But it's also going to help him with Latino voters, coming from a president who was representative of all minorities. compared to Bernie Sanders, who comes from a state like Vermont. Yes, he can resonate with these voters, but he's probably not going to. Being completely honest, Bernie Sanders isn't always the best person to appeal to minorities. He's a white man from Vermont, an old white man from Vermont, who's been in the Senate for a really long time. You can't really say he's going to do the best when it comes to appealing to minority voters unless he has some other track record that proves otherwise. And yes, there's that argument. Yes, he did fight for civil rights. He got arrested for civil rights. However, it's not nationally known. That's not known by minority groups. They didn't know Bernie Sanders as someone who fought for the black community. Otherwise, he would have won in the South. He wouldn't have been demolished in the South. Take out the South, Hillary Clinton would have not been the nominee, and the outcome of the election might have been a little different. But she was the nominee because she won the black vote, and that's something that Bernie Sanders really needs to work hard on. He's probably not going to win it against Joe Biden. He could win it against another Democrat like Elizabeth Warren, which he probably won't run against, but keep in mind, he's probably not going to do the best. I mean, when I'm talking about, I need to stop saying but when I talk about a proven track record, it needs to be known nationwide. Everyone knew Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. Everyone knew that she was the First Lady. Everyone knew that she was a senator from New York. Most people didn't even know Bernie Sanders existed until halfway through the primary. So you can't argue that Bernie Sanders' track record is known nationwide. That's the reason why they're pushing out political ads that show him fighting for civil rights, or those photos that were so monumental and there were scandals about them because they needed to prove the validity of the photos themselves, because people typically didn't believe it, especially someone like Bernie Sanders coming from a state like Vermont. It wasn't believable. However, there is clear evidence that he did fight for the civil rights movement. I'm not going to get any more off topic about this, but it's not known nationwide, and it probably won't be known nationwide by 2020, and Latino voters are probably going to turn to the vice president under the first African-American president, the first minority president of the United States, along with the fact that Joe Biden typically works better with the number of these voters. Hillary Clinton did pretty well in the Sun Belt compared to previous Democrats, even Donald Trump. And it's probably because of her primary performance and lack of enthusiasm on the Republican side. But again, she did do pretty well here. When we come to the South, I do not see a possibility of a Bernie Sanders victory whatsoever. It does. I can understand how the margins could tighten up, but the South is not going for Bernie Sanders. This is his weakest part of the United States. And again, as my previous point has been saying, he's not going to do well here. He may do well in some up northern states. Yes, I'll give him that, but I'm not going to give him the South. The South is completely out of the reach for Bernie Sanders, even though his approval rating with African Americans are going up, even though he has more name recognition. Joe Biden, vice president under President Barack Obama. It's not that hard to understand how the South would easily go to someone like Joe Biden. Coming from heavy African American populations amongst the Democratic community, we're not going to see a Bernie Sanders victory. It's just how things are and how divided the Democratic Party, number one, is, and how divided America is. And it's not going to be as easy as you might think for a Bernie Sanders victory, especially against someone who's a former vice president. This is probably going to be the most hotly contested Democratic primary race that we'll ever see in a long time, and that's saying something. Going back to Colorado, I do see a Bernie Sanders victory, very narrowly though, but again, anything can happen. We're not in 2020 yet. When we go over to Iowa, I think the hype will be there for Bernie Sanders. I think he'll carry Iowa in the spirit of going through things in order. I think he would also carry New Hampshire for obvious reasons. Clearly, he would carry Vermont. He would carry Maine. This is a little different. I do see Bernie Sanders carrying the state of Massachusetts. He didn't do that back in 2016. I see him narrowly carrying it in 2020 in a Democratic primary. I see him carrying Rhode Island yet again. Connecticut was also a little close, but Bernie Sanders will probably hold on to that one. Joe Biden will probably hold on to Connecticut along with New Jersey and his home state of Delaware. I also see him carrying the state of Maryland and the District of Columbia. So don't think that Bernie Sanders is automatically going to lose looking at this map. Yes, he's probably not going to win 270 or more electoral votes, but again, it's all about the demographics, and it's all about the number of delegates in each state. So this may or may not be an accurate indication. Neither candidate, I'm telling you right now, neither candidate is going to come out here winning an overall supermajority, or someone who doesn't need to go to a contested convention, because that's exactly what this is leading up to. Just looking at the rest of the United States, you know that blue is probably going to pour over into a little bit more of the Midwest. But right now, Joe Biden clearly at the advantage, just based off African-American voters having such a heavy presence minority voters in general having such a heavy presence in the Democratic community. It's really hard for Bernie Sanders to win. With my state of Maryland, with his home state of Delaware, and his other home state of Pennsylvania, that puts him over the top. And that's enough to give Joe Biden a 284 electoral vote victory, which this is not an electoral vote map. Just going to show for population-wise how Biden could win there over Bernie Sanders. But when we go to the state of New York, that one is going to be a pure toss-up. I want to come back to that one. Kentucky, Hillary Clinton carried. Bernie Sanders will probably carry it this time around. West Virginia going to Bernie Sanders again. He carried Indiana. He carried Michigan. He carried Wisconsin. And he carried Minnesota. These states, again, pouring over more blue. I also see him carrying the state of Missouri. These states were exceptionally close, especially a state like Illinois we'll come to, which was very close for someone who's from the state. Hillary Clinton narrowly winning in Illinois. I see going to Bernie Sanders. So this pretty much pours in a lot more blue on the map than we saw back in 2016. And we haven't talked about Democrats abroad or any of the territories or commonwealths, which we're probably not going to because that's not vital to the Democratic primary process, considering they don't even vote in the general election. Yes, they should be noted. However, I don't think it's enough to make an impact on this type of a race, considering it's going to go to a contested convention either way. In an event where it could nudge one candidate over the top, yes, it would be influential. But again, I don't have any of the territories up here. I can't add it to the electoral vote map, so it's a little hard to do. But Biden currently is in the lead. And when we look at the map, I think he would also carry the state of Virginia. That's something that's going to be pretty easy for him to carry just based off how Clinton Democrats have done very well here, especially in primaries leading up after the Trump administration has taken charge. But New York, that one's going to be focused on a lot. I think Bernie Sanders could narrowly win it. But again, that would still definitely help him when it comes to the Democratic primary race. I also see Bernie Sanders carrying the state of Ohio. That one Hillary Clinton handedly carried back in 2016. But I see Bernie Sanders carrying the state of Ohio by a narrow margin. But I think his appeal to the Midwest was a lot better than Hillary Clinton's, especially leading up into the 2016 election. So Ohio probably would go to Bernie Sanders over someone like Joe Biden. So looking at the final map, Biden clearly wins nationwide with overall number of votes. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that this is going to land him a clear victory in the convention. He's probably going to have to go into a contested convention, and Bernie Sanders may or may not be the nominee. Just keep in mind the superdelegates are still going to be poised against someone like Bernie Sanders, so there's not much hope for him there, which is why I think that if he did run, he would need to win an overall super majority, I guess. Just winning overall the number of pledged delegates needed to win the nomination outright instead of going to the convention. So thank you guys for watching this video. Comment down suggestions below, and I'll see you all tomorrow.